I never meant to break anything that afternoon. The bell above the door rang as I stumbled backward. My elbow caught the shelf. The vase fell. It shattered into 100 pale blue pieces. I braced for shouting. Instead, she smiled. Finally, she said. That thing was cursed anyway. I didn't know that smile would undo my whole life. My name is Dana Whitfield, and I had sworn off surprises. At 29, I believed my future was already decided. A steady job, a hometown wedding, a life that looked correct on paper. I walked into Sutter & Sons Antiques on a rainy Savannah afternoon, only because I was hiding from my own engagement party. The shop smelled of cedar and old paper, and a woman with paint-stained fingers knelt to gather the broken porcelain without a trace of anger. "I'm so sorry," I kept saying, kneeling beside her, my dress absorbing dust from the floorboards. "Don't be," she said, glancing up. "It's just glass. Glass breaks so something else can be seen." Her name was Wren Sutter, and she ran the shop her grandmother had left her 3 years earlier. I offered to pay for the vase. She refused, saying instead I owed her one honest conversation over coffee. I told myself I agreed because it was polite, not because her eyes had made my chest go quiet. We sat at a corner table while rain streaked the windows, and she asked what I was running from. I said nothing, but my silence apparently answered enough for her to simply nod and change the subject. She told me about her grandmother, about the shop, about learning to love things other people had discarded. I found myself staying 2 hours longer than I meant to, laughing more than I had in months. When I finally left, she pressed a small chipped teacup into my hands. "For the vase," she said. I drove home holding that teacup on my lap like it might disappear if I looked away from it. I returned to the shop the following Tuesday, telling myself I only wanted to check on the floor repairs. Wren didn't seem surprised to see me. She simply handed me a rag and asked if I wanted to help dust shelves. We worked in comfortable silence, and I noticed how she handled every object like it still remembered being loved. I started visiting twice a week, then 3 times, inventing errands that always seemed to lead me back to her door. My fiancé, Grant, asked why I smelled like sawdust and lavender polish. I told him I'd found a new hobby. It wasn't entirely a lie, though the hobby had brown eyes and a laugh that made my ribs ache. One evening Wren showed me a drawer of old love letters she'd found sealed inside a roll-top desk. "People used to write like this," she said. Like every sentence mattered because they might never get another chance. I asked if she'd ever loved like that. She looked at me a long moment before answering. "Not yet." Something shifted between us that night, quiet and unspoken, like a door left open just a few inches. I began noticing things I hadn't let myself notice before. How she tucked hair behind her ear when nervous. How she remembered which mug I preferred. How she saved me the first cup of coffee every morning. I told myself this was friendship, the kind that simply felt more vivid than anything I'd had before. Grant proposed a wedding date in October. I said yes without thinking, the way you agreed to weather. That night I sat in my car outside the shop for 20 minutes before finding the courage to knock. Wren opened the door in flour-dusted sleeves, having baked bread just to have an excuse to stay open late. We ate warm bread standing at the counter, and for the first time in years, I felt entirely awake. "You're getting married," she said quietly. Not a question, more like she was testing how it sounded aloud. "In October," I said. And neither of us moved, and neither of us looked away from the other. "I don't want to be someone's secret," she finally said. "But I also don't want you to leave." I didn't answer. I just reached across the counter and laced my fingers through hers, slow and certain. She didn't pull away. Instead she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the day the vase broke. "I need time," I whispered, and she nodded, though her eyes carried a sadness she tried hard to hide. Driving home that night, I finally let myself say the word I'd been avoiding. I was falling in love. Not with the wedding, not with the life laid out for me, but with a woman who fixed broken things. I broke off my engagement to Grant 3 weeks later. In a conversation that left us both in tears, he asked if there was someone else. I said there was someone who made me remember who I was. My mother called it a phase, a stress reaction, anything but the truth staring plainly at her. I stopped answering her calls for a while, needing space to breathe before facing her disappointment head-on. Ren and I began spending nearly every evening together, closing the shop and walking along the river instead. She told me about her grandmother, Eleanor, who'd raised her after her parents passed, and how much she missed her. I told her about growing up the only daughter in a family that measured success by how well you obeyed. We didn't rush anything. We let the relationship unfold slowly, like restoring something fragile without cracking it further. The first time she kissed me, it was beside a shelf of chipped teacups, both of us laughing nervously first. It felt less like a beginning and more like something that had always been true, finally allowed to surface. I told her I loved her on a Tuesday, standing in the exact spot where I'd broken that vase. She said she'd loved me since the day I apologized to broken porcelain like it could hear me. For the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me instead of everyone around me. We started dreaming aloud about small things, a garden, a dog. Sunday mornings with no alarm clocks at all. I thought the hardest part was behind us. I had no idea the real trouble was only beginning. My mother finally agreed to meet Ren, though her tight smile promised nothing close to warmth or welcome. Dinner was stiff and formal, my mother asking pointed questions about Ren's plans and stability like an interrogation. Ren answered every question with grace, though I saw her knuckles whiten around her fork more than once. Afterward, my mother pulled me aside and said, "I didn't raise you to embarrass this family in public." "I'm not embarrassing anyone," I said. "I'm finally being honest, which is more than I can say for years." She said if I chose this life, I shouldn't expect her at any future family gatherings or holidays. I left that night gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached long after I got home. Ren found me crying on her porch steps and simply sat beside me without demanding an explanation right away. "I won't ask you to choose me over your mother," she said. "But I won't hide either. Not again." I didn't understand what "not again" meant until she finally told me about her own past that night. Years earlier, Ren had loved a woman named Callie, who left when her own family threatened to disown her. "I promised myself I'd never be someone's secret twice," she said, voice steady despite the old wound beneath it. I promised her she wouldn't be, though promises are easy to make in the safety of a quiet porch. The real test came a month later, when Grant's sister invited us both to a mutual friend's engagement party. I hesitated, worried about gossip, about my mother's friends whispering behind champagne glasses about my new direction in life. Ren noticed my hesitation and quietly said she'd understand if I wanted to go alone, though her eyes said otherwise. I chose to bring her anyway, my hand steady in hers as we walked through the door together. The room went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before conversation resumed, and somehow those seconds felt like victory. Not everyone was kind. One woman asked loudly if this was a phase, and I answered without flinching. "No," I said. "This is the first time I've ever told the truth about who I am." Ren squeezed my hand under the table, and for the first time, I saw her visibly relax in public. That night felt like a turning point, until a new threat arrived that had nothing to do with gossip. A letter arrived at the shop from Marsh Development, offering to buy the entire block for a shopping plaza. Ren's hand shook as she read it twice, then set it down like it might catch fire. "They can't force me to sell," she said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty on the matter. I researched the zoning laws late into the night, determined to find a way to help her fight back. My background in marketing meant I understood exactly how these campaigns worked, and exactly how to counter one. "Let me help," I said. She hesitated, unused to leaning on anyone since her grandmother had passed away. "This shop is the only thing I have left of her," Ren admitted, voice cracking for the first time. I promised we'd fight for it together, though I didn't yet know how steep that fight would become. Marsh Development began quietly buying out neighboring shop owners, offering sums few small businesses could reasonably refuse. One by one, the Antique Rose shopkeepers sold, until Wren's shop stood as the lone holdout on the block. The developer sent a representative who implied, not so subtly, that resistance would only make things harder later. Wren didn't back down, though I watched the stress carve new lines of worry across her tired face. We organized a petition, gathering signatures from longtime customers who remembered her grandmother fondly from decades past. My mother, hearing about the shop's trouble through town gossip, surprised me by asking quiet, careful questions about it. I didn't know if it was concern for me or simple curiosity, but I answered her honestly regardless. Meanwhile, Callie resurfaced, arriving in town for a cousin's wedding and stopping by the shop unannounced one afternoon. I watched Wren's face shift into something guarded the moment the bell rang and Callie stepped inside. I made a mistake leaving, Callie said plainly, glancing at me like I was simply an obstacle in her way. Wren's jaw tightened. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. There's a difference, she said evenly. Callie pressed further, asking for one dinner, just to talk about everything left unsaid between them years ago. I felt something cold settle in my chest, though I tried to keep my expression carefully unreadable. Wren refused the dinner, but that night I asked if she still had feelings buried beneath the old hurt. I loved who she used to be, Wren said, but I love who you actually are. Right now. Completely. Doubt crept in uninvited, whispering that maybe I was simply a rebound from an old, unfinished story. I pulled away slightly over the following days, distracted and distant, unable to name exactly what was wrong. Wren noticed immediately. She always noticed, which was part of why I'd fallen for her in the first place. Talk to me, she said one evening, blocking the shop door so I couldn't slip past without answering. I finally admitted my fear, that I was a stepping stone, not a destination, in someone else's longer story. Wren looked genuinely hurt. You've met my whole heart, Dana. Callie only ever saw the parts that were convenient. Her honesty cracked something open in me, and I apologized for doubting a love that had never once wavered. We repaired that small fracture quickly, but the developer's pressure only intensified as the deadline approached. Marsh Development scheduled a city council vote to reclassify the block, a vote that could force Wren out entirely. I threw myself into building a campaign, using every skill I had to rally the community around the shop. We created flyers, a social media page, even a small documentary showing the history hidden inside Wren's inventory. My mother, unexpectedly, showed up one afternoon offering to help address envelopes for the mailing campaign we'd organized. I still don't fully understand your choices, she said, but I understand fighting for something you love. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a door cracked open, and I chose to walk through it gently. The night before the council vote, Wren found the sealed drawer of old letters again, reading them by lamplight. One letter, dated 1962, was signed only E, and addressed to someone named Margaret, Wren's grandmother, in careful cursive. The letter spoke of secret meetings, of love hidden behind a friendship the whole town assumed was ordinary. Wren's hands trembled as she realized her grandmother had loved a woman too, decades before it was safe to say aloud. She never told me, Wren whispered. She let me think I was the only one in this family who felt this way. We found more letters that night. An entire hidden history folded into drawers no one had thought to search. Margaret had kept the shop, in part, as a quiet shrine to a love she'd never been allowed to name. Wren cried harder than I'd ever seen her cry, grieving a grandmother she realized she'd never fully known. She hid it to protect me, Wren said, the same way I almost hid you to protect myself. That discovery changed something in her. She decided the council meeting wouldn't just be about a building anymore. The next evening, the community hall filled with neighbors, reporters, and Marsh Development executives in expensive, tailored suits. Ren stood at the podium, hands shaking slightly, and began reading from her grandmother's 60-year-old letter aloud. The room went silent as she described a woman who'd loved in secret her entire life. In that very shop. "This building isn't just brick and glass," Ren said. "It's the only place my grandmother was ever fully herself." I watched pride swell in my chest so large it nearly overwhelmed the fear sitting right beside it. The developer's representative shifted uncomfortably as murmurs of support rippled through the gathered crowd around the room. Then my mother, unexpectedly, stood up from the back row and asked to speak before the vote proceeded. My heart stopped. I had no idea what she intended to say in front of the entire watching town. "I've spent months struggling to accept my daughter's happiness," she said, voice unsteady but growing stronger with each word. "But watching this shop fight to exist, the way people fight to be seen, taught me something about myself too. This town has always claimed to value history," she continued, "so it should value the people living inside it now." Couldn't breathe. Watching my mother publicly choose us. In a room full of people she knew, the council members exchanged glances. Clearly unprepared for the emotional weight the meeting had unexpectedly carried that night. A vote was called, and by a narrow margin, the rezoning proposal failed, preserving the block as it stood. The room erupted into applause, and Ren turned to me with tears streaming freely down both her cheeks. I crossed the room and held her tightly, not caring who watched us in that crowded, celebrating hall. My mother approached afterward, awkward but sincere, and hugged Ren for the very first time since we'd met. "Take care of my daughter," she said simply, and Ren promised she intended to, for as long as allowed. That night felt like the peak of everything we'd fought for. But one complication still remained unresolved between us. Grant, hearing about the public meeting, reached out asking to meet, saying he needed closure before moving forward himself. I agreed, mostly out of respect for the years we'd shared before I understood myself more fully. He admitted he'd sensed something was different long before I did, though he'd hoped he was simply imagining it. "I'm not angry anymore," he said. "I just hope she makes you as happy as you look right now." I thanked him, grateful for a conversation that closed one chapter without bitterness lingering behind it. With the shop saved and my mother slowly softening, I finally let myself imagine an actual future with Ren. We spent a quiet Sunday repairing the old roll-top desk, sanding it smooth, restoring its original honeyed color. "I want to find Margaret's letters a home," Ren said. "Maybe donate them to the Historical Society downtown, so other people know love like theirs existed, even when the world tried hard to erase it entirely." I agreed immediately, moved by the thought of hidden histories finally getting the light they'd always deserved. We spent weeks transcribing the letters, careful with each fragile page, piecing together decades of a secret devotion. The Historical Society accepted the collection gratefully, planning a small exhibit dedicated to Margaret and her beloved E. On opening night, dozens of townspeople gathered to read the letters displayed carefully behind protective glass casing. Ren stood beside the exhibit, finally able to honor her grandmother's truth in front of an entire community. I watched her face, illuminated by soft gallery lighting, and felt overwhelmed by how far we'd both come. "You gave her a voice," I whispered. "After 60 years of silence, you finally let her be heard." Ren took my hand in front of everyone, unbothered now by who might be watching us together. A local reporter asked if she'd comment on the exhibit for the paper's weekend feature story. "This exhibit exists because love deserves honesty," Ren said, "even the kind that took generations to finally surface." I felt tears gathering as she looked directly at me while she said it, meaning every single word. That night, walking home beneath string lights strung across the historic district, Ren stopped suddenly in the street. "I want to ask you something," she said, pulling a small ring from her coat pocket, hands trembling slightly. My breath caught as she knelt right there on the cobblestones, ignoring the small crowd gathering nearby to watch. I don't have a fortune, she said. But I have a shop full of things people thought were broken. I know how to see worth in what others discard. I've never seen anything more worth keeping than you. Dana Whitfield. Will you marry me? Right here. In the place where everything between us actually began. I said yes before she even finished the question. Pulling her up into a kiss the whole street witnessed. Applause broke out from strangers who'd stopped to watch, along with a few tearful onlookers wiping their eyes. My mother, informed the next morning, cried on the phone, saying she wouldn't miss this wedding for anything. We planned a small ceremony in the shop itself, surrounded by the very shelves that had first brought us together. Ren restored the original vase's pieces into a mosaic frame, displaying it above the register as a keepsake. A reminder, she said, that broken things can become something more beautiful than they ever were before. On our wedding day, sunlight poured through the shop's old windows, catching dust like scattered gold across the floor. My mother walked me partway down the narrow aisle between antique shelves, squeezing my hand before letting go. Grant sent flowers with a card wishing us well, a gesture that closed our story with quiet grace. Callie didn't attend, though she sent a short note wishing Ren the happiness she hoped to someday find herself. Ren's vows spoke of broken porcelain, hidden letters, and a love finally allowed to exist without apology or hiding. My vows spoke of a woman who taught me that honesty, however frightening, was always worth the risk. We exchanged rings beside the very shelf where the vase had shattered nearly 2 years before that day. The small crowd of friends and family applauded as we kissed, sealing a promise years in the making. Afterward, we hung a small plaque near the door reading, "Some things break so something truer can begin." Customers still ask about it sometimes, and Ren tells the story with the same warm smile she gave me that first day. We eventually expanded the shop, adding a small reading nook filled with restored books nobody else had wanted. My mother visits every Sunday now, learning to appreciate objects and people she once dismissed too quickly. We adopted a small terrier from the shelter, naming her Margaret, after the grandmother who started this whole story. Some nights, we sit together reading old letters customers bring in, restoring histories other people had nearly forgotten. I think often about that rainy afternoon, how one clumsy mistake unlocked a life I never knew I wanted. Ren says she isn't surprised. She believes broken things always find their way toward gentle, patient hands eventually. I used to think love meant following a script someone else had written long before I was born. Now I understand love means writing your own story, even when the ending looks nothing like you expected. We still keep the mosaic vase above the register, catching afternoon light in 100 scattered fragments. Every piece tells a different part of our story: the mistake, the apology, the slow unfolding of truth. My mother once asked if I regretted any of it: the broken engagement, the public exposure, the risk. I told her the only regret I carried was waiting so long to finally live as myself. Ren often says the shop taught her that value isn't erased by cracks, only rearranged into something new. I believe the same is true for people, for families, for love that takes its time arriving honestly. We plan to pass the shop down someday, along with every letter, every lesson, every quiet act of courage. Margaret's love story finally found its ending in daylight, decades after she'd been forced to hide it. And mine began the exact moment a vase shattered, and a stranger chose to smile instead of shout. I used to fear breaking things beyond repair, never realizing some breaks are simply where the light gets in. Ren and I still work behind that counter every day, grateful for the vase, the shop, and each other. That night at the council hall, an elderly woman touched my arm, saying she remembered Margaret keeping the shop lit late. She always seemed to be waiting on someone who never quite arrived, the woman said, before slipping back into the crowd. I looked at Ren, wondering if she'd heard, and found her eyes already glistening with quiet, complicated recognition. Later, restoring an old mirror together, Ren said healing a family's silence takes longer than restoring any single object ever could. I told her some mirrors just need someone patient enough to wipe away the dust and finally look closely. We keep Margaret's photograph beside the register now. A woman who waited decades for a truth we finally gave voice to. Every anniversary, we leave fresh flowers beneath her portrait. A small thank you for the shop she left behind. People still wander and asking about the mosaic vase. And I still tell them it was the best mistake of my life. Fendi.